can be restored. So with that, let's welcome Laura Magdalene Eisenhower back to the show. It's been quite a while, Laura. Welcome. We'll go from there. And welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Laura, thank you for being with us. Laura, just for the people who don't are not familiar with you yet, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and your family history, I think that might enlighten some folks.
Well, my background, I did grow up in the Eisenhower family. Eisenhower's my great-grandfather, so I had an interesting upbringing, and just was definitely my own person. I have a background in wilderness education, expedition leadership. But for the most part, I was aware of my mission at a very young age and just really launched on some deep inner journeys and some very multidimensional experiences that opened me up to a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and have sort of been working to integrate the political stuff that we see with the more mythological, the deeper soul journey, and where I guess you could say the artificial matrix has sort of wedged itself between everything, keeping us in, separation. My background is kind of extensive as far as, my travels and education. I'm definitely my own, I guess you could say, university unto myself. I just kind of didn't really resonate with anything in school, so I just studied my own stuff. And I'm an intuitive astrologer, an esoteric astrologer, I guess you could say, working with archetypes and the deeper soul aspects, the deeper soul journey. And I use it as a healing tool. And my background's also in metaphysics, exopolitics, and I consider myself a cosmic mythologist and a global alchemist because of the deeper, work and just kind of like how I work to connect the dots and, use my own personal path as a way to just find these answers, and it's sort of like just sort of happened that way. And I realized, okay, I'm on quite a path that's revealing a lot. And then I was recruited in 2006 to go off planet to Mars, which really gave me an insight into what's happening behind the scenes even more so, and helped me to understand the deeper layers of the military-industrial complex and a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with our governments and extraterrestrials. And then, of course, the more off-planet benevolent.
Oops. Shiznit, how the hell do I...
Hello?
Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh boy, you brought up the industrial. That's just exactly where I wanted to go too. And I guess
Click.
let's just we can edit this out, so it's no big deal. Why don't we pick it up from the industrial, from the let's pick it up from the military industrial complex. How's that?
Sure.
Okay.
Right. So, a lot about my, I guess, explorations into the hidden mysteries and, the hidden information happened in 2006 when I was recruited to go off planet. And it really helped me to understand the deeper layers of the military industrial complex and, really what we're up against as far as, hidden agendas and extraterrestrial forces connecting with our government. I guess you could call them the lower type. I don't even really consider them extraterrestrial, but
let me ask you a question here. You said that you were recruited to go off planet. Can you go explain that a little bit?
Well, in 2006, I was approached by somebody, and and I met this person. We really clicked right off the bat, and the conversation got really weird pretty fast about just the end times and what we're dealing with in 2012, and over time, as I was, seeing this person on occasion and, beginning to, form a relationship, I was presented with the opportunity to go off planet, but it was very secretive. And I thought that it was just sort of, this was something the person was going to do anyway. And I just happened to be, in the synchronicity to meet this person, but it was something I could easily get out of. But 6 months into the relationship, I found out that he was specifically sent to find me, to recruit me. And, that whole experience along the way was really intense because, he was going to secret meetings and I was observing all of this, and I noticed a lot going on in connection to, his relation with some beings that he was in communication with about this, off-planet venture. And so I paid attention to the names that he was talking to and just everything that I could possibly kind of retain as far as what I was seeing. And I did a lot of research into some of these names and started to really get the intuitive hits of what it was really all about, and even some prophetic dreams. And I mean, from the get-go, I knew that this was something I didn't want to do. But as I got further immersed in it and realized that wasn't something I could easily get out of, once I was kind of immersed in the relationship and living with this person, and it sort of reached to the extreme, and it was a lot different than what I thought, being so hidden and being, really about not being able to say anything to anybody, and it relating to, potential disasters. Along the way, when I recognized that the names were associated with things like, chemtrails and HARP and psychotronic weaponry, and I had felt targeted my whole life, I knew that, this was something completely different. And that's when I really started to research people like Dan Burrish, timelines, hidden agendas, artificial timelines, artificial telepathy, and everything that I could possibly get my hands on to try and understand what was going on. And when I got a grip and understood enough of it, I really worked to just get out of it, completely and totally. Before, it didn't have that extremity to it. It was just sort of like, this is the goal. But the more I tried to get out of it, the stronger the forces were that didn't want me to go. And that's when I found out that he was sent to, take me. And, I have a lot of email exchanges and a lot that I still have stored and saved. But over the years, especially after Project Camelot came about, which was the same year I got out of the recruitment, was when Project Camelot started. I'm seeing all these other whistleblowers, and I'm starting to see how this is a part of like a much larger plan. And of course, it goes back thousands of years. I mean, these agendas, but it relates to things from Project Pegasus, Andrew Bashago, whistleblowers like Michael Rife. And now we've got Captain K, talking about stuff on Mars. And, the list is pretty big.
So now, was this recruitment part of the military-industrial complex, or was this more separated from that, more along extraterrestrials, let's say, wanting to preserve humans?
Well, it seems all connected, the military-industrial complex to, ETs. And it's difficult to say, especially thinking in duality of who's good and who's not good. Instead, it's like, okay, there's many different races, and a lot of them are, trying to survive. But unfortunately, we're sort of caught in the middle. And so these particular beings seem to be future human selves that have time traveled back and had the appearance of like, a gray ET. Dan Burrish and other whistleblowers talk about, the future human selves. Many remote viewers, notice that they came from different timelines in the future. And it does relate to the military-industrial complex. In actual fact, in the Eisenhower administration, there was something, people have heard of MJ-12, which was set up in Truman's administration. But by the time Eisenhower came into office, MJ-12, had already been in the dealings with some of this ET stuff, because treaties with extraterrestrials actually originated with Roosevelt. And this was all during, the Second World War time, with Hitler as well. And so by the time Eisenhower came around, basically these treaties are renewed every 10 years. But by the time he stepped into office, it wasn't so much about a treaty. It was about a surrender. When the Nordics first met with them, they hadn't reached an agreement. And then the Greys, came in pretty quick after. And they were pretty much defenseless with all their weapons and technologies. And so, they created, this treaty based on a surrender, which meant more technology was in the hands of these hidden groups like MJ-12. And so it wasn't really about the presidency anymore. And part of the agreement had to do with alternatives 1, 2, and 3. Alternative 3 being about going off planet and establishing colonies on other planets, most especially Mars. And then also the creation of underground bases, which had already been underway. We're dealing with about 4,000 in the world today. So when the recruitment happened, and I'm, thinking, wow, Mars, like, really? Like, I have all my doubts about it. I'm like, maybe this is all just a big lie, and they're just manipulating me. And of course, I was being manipulated. But digging further into it, discovering alternatives 1, 2, and 3, and a lot about MJ-12 and the Jason scholars and these future human selves and the manipulation of timelines, it all started to make sense. And then when I contrasted it to my mission, which was to, stay on Earth or have a mission about Gaia and assisting in this shift into higher Earth energies based on the opening of the natural stargates, I could see the major contrast, and that's when everything kind of opened up, and I started to really work on connecting the dots of everything in our galactic and ancient history.
That's something I appreciate. In a previous interview, which we've done a couple of years back, we tend to look at this situation here on Earth from basically two different sides. It's one coin, but you look at it from the Gaia side, I look at it from the Yahweh side, and we both come up with pretty much the same story, which I find fascinating personally. Just to go back though. Now, you had mentioned that this was a treaty that was signed under the Roosevelt administration. I was not aware of that before. I was aware of the situation that was going on with Hitler, but I'm not totally surprised considering that Roosevelt and Hitler both came into power and were sponsored essentially by the same backing.
Right.
So, big surprise there, right?
Right.
So that there was obviously an agenda even before those two individuals, Roosevelt and Hitler, were presidents or chancellors of their countries. There's a long, deep trail here. It goes, as you said, it goes back centuries. Millennia.
Yeah, to Atlantis, and Aleister Crowley, is involved in the mix, and just this whole implementation of an artificial timeline based on these dark occult technologies. And 26,000 years ago, some of them, the Nephilim reversal grid was put in place under Stonehenge to affect the ley lines so that we wouldn't be able to create unity or sacred union and basically marry our genetics or heal the genetic lines from a lot of the lower ET forces that got their DNA involved.
Now, I've got another question for you. You said that the one of the treaties, I guess, what was it, the third? By the time we got to the third treaty, it was more of a surrender. Did Earth surrender?
Well, it wasn't so much the Earth. It was just those that were in the position to have anything to do with these beings that were at the meetings. And when you're dealing with the presidency, and you've got like the advisors, on the surface appearing to be allies, but in actual fact are a part of the shadow government and Illuminati. You're not really playing with, people that are in the same position when they're relating to these beings. And so there was a lot of manipulation, and that's why they were never able to form an agreement, because all the advisors had their foot in sort of the deeper terrain of these agendas, because they had been a part of the family lines and the treaties, back with Roosevelt and Hitler, and even earlier than that, because they connect with the Anunnaki, which is,
Yeah, now we're back to Sumerian 4,500 years ago.
Right. So, and then they have their little pawn presidents. And then when Eisenhower realized, like, wait a second, why don't I have any power here? And why, if this treaty was about helping, this race survive, and whatever the treaty was is being breached and betrayed, how come, MJ-12 has all the alien technology and he has no ability anymore to ask them questions and get information? And so there was an interview with Richard Dolan and somebody named Anonymous about how he wanted to invade Area 51 because what he was getting from the very get-go was not the truth of what was actually happening. And that's when he gave us a warning, because he realized that the people he was surrounded by were actually a part of these treaties and agendas. And, this had been carefully implemented beforehand, but it appeared to be, completely different. And that's what we're dealing with politics. We're dealing in government, compartmentalism. And, some people know the bigger picture of what's going on, and other people are only given a certain amount of information. And most of them are dealing with patriotic programming, where they're being convinced that they're doing something heroic for the sake of humankind, or, for the betterment of the planet. But in actual fact, they're helping to implement an artificial timeline and agenda that is heading towards New World Order. And so he began to woke up to it. And that's why the Nordic, working with the Nordics was so difficult for him, because all these different things, started to just kind of get in the way. And, not being able to reach an agreement, it's kind of like, a jury room. If not everybody's in agreement, even if you are the president, you can't make that final call, because that's not the way that it's all set up.
Yeah, you got a hung jury. And this is interesting, because here, something that I was instructed by my mentors all the way back when I was first taught as a young child, was to stay out of religion and politics. I was forbidden to get involved in both Earth religion and politics. And when we do the research, we find that both religion and politics can be directly historically tracked back to early Sumeria, hence the cradle of civilization. And where did we get religion, or I say, where did the Sumerians get religion and politics? Off planet, from this race we call, or they call, the Anunnaki. And so we've got a 4,500-year written history of these life forms involved in Earth affairs, in human affairs, and they set themselves up as gods over our ancestors.
Yeah.
And Laura, did you say now that the Greys were actually an earlier human species that has actually time traveled or?
Future human selves that had already gone down a timeline that went off planet and into underground bases, and they lost their reproductive ability. They basically morphed into these gray looking beings. And actually this has happened on other planets, a planet called Apex. Nuclear war and all sorts of crazy stuff happened, and they were driven underground and basically modified into grays. And the thing is, it's sort of complex, and I've done a lot of research, and I know there's always gray areas, and people take what resonates and leave the rest.
Gray areas with grays.
Right. But I mean, there's many different species, and so there's the tall whites, and they were on Rigel, and they were modified from being Nordic into the tall whites. I mean, anytime you're dealing with a gray, more than likely you're dealing with an enslaved race that has become a gray ET. And then you have the automations, you have the EBEs, and then you have like the constant cloning of them, which then creates sort of this soulless entity that is more, connected to a hive mind or an artificial intelligence system. But this is what happens when, we as a human race are driven underground, or if we go off planet. And of course, there's other races underground that have not lost, they haven't done.
Here we go again.
Yeah. I want to ask her about time travel and how long it's been in existence. Oh, well, the fact is, if it's in existence now, it could now be in existence 10,000 years ago, right? So, but anyway.
Dropping.
I can't imagine why we keep on dropping. You would think that maybe someone's listening and doesn't want this information to get out. It smacks in the first interview that we did. Our first interview was supposed to be a 3-hour interview. It lasted 30 minutes.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, whenever we get together, look out, folks. The truth is going to be heard, and they are not going to like it.
And I was wondering about time travel. So if this is a technology that really exists, and if we're going to believe that it exists, and I'm talking about everybody because there's skeptics out there, then is it fair to say that they could have gone back and really manipulated our entire existence?
Oh, definitely. It's a hard one to grasp because, when we sit there with our imaginations, it's like, well, how is it possible? Similar to like, seeing on Star Trek people, them beaming each other up or whatever. So, yeah, from what I understand and with the number of whistleblowers out there and what I've learned about all the technology trades and what's been happening and just, understanding kind of like what happens beyond this third density and how these crafts actually work. Yeah, time travel absolutely exists because it's outside of the time, matrix that we're in.
Now, Lori, you brought up something interesting about these grays traveling back. Now, you mentioned one thing, that they came back from a particular timeline to this point. And I find that interesting. You also mentioned that they went underground. When we look at all of the underground base...
Wow, don't use Wi-Fi for interviews. Flash report, no Wi-Fi for interviews.
There that we have. And we're looking at what's going on with Fukushima. I'm wondering if we haven't set ourselves up for this. And now, we know that they have genetic engineering technology. If this was allowed, and the other thing that we know is that they have the 2045 initiative which is the transhuman initiative to turn, to essentially eliminate biological humans and turn us all into nanobots via nanobot technology.
Right, and this is what we're seeing is that these beings, have time traveled back. The less benevolent ones are a part of keeping that timeline alive, because basically when we're dealing with the Bilderbergs and the Council of Foreign Relations and, everything connected to MJ12 and those who have hands on the alien technology, they want the catastrophic timeline. And the catastrophic timeline is connected to alternative 3. But what I was starting to understand, or what I intuitively was getting, was that me going off to Mars or being a part of that agenda, we're not dealing with natural cataclysms because they've got technologies like HARP. They can create superstorms. We're dealing with weather modification. So why do we have to evacuate Mother Earth? And basically because they're creating a Armageddon scenario. And so certain beings that time travel back want to keep this agenda alive by pushing us into that timeline so that we do go off planet into underground bases, even though they might be told something different. And then the ones that are further ahead on the timeline have time travel back to warn us on a certain level about some of the things we're up against. But then it seems that it's still the same solution because in order, the same agenda, because in order for them to exist, we have to go along that timeline, even though it doesn't lead to a positive future. But I do believe that there's some races that are probably trying to divert us completely, which were the Nordics, because they, were modified on Rigel and they've seen, what has happened, and they've been trying to help us to get rid of the nuclear energy and help us to get rid of the weapons and help us to stop war. But this deeper, thing going on underneath the surface, this control agenda, connected to the Anunnaki and the Luciferian faction, have wanted us to be on this catastrophic timeline because we're much more easily controlled. They want us to digress to those forms, and this is what we're dealing with, and we're already seeing, our skies are being sprayed, everything is being done, and we're heading right down that path. But at the same time, being aware of this and unplugging from all of this is where we can continue to expand and, still be anchored on the ascension timeline. It's just a very, very intense time, and everybody's got to kind of walk carefully and really pay attention and have a lot of discernment and really protect themselves. I don't think we're all doomed, but I think, the agenda, the negative agenda is pretty established. But if we recognize it in time, we can divert ourselves from it.
Well, just this little test that they did of the power grid of the United States, was it last October, November? Everybody was freaking out. Oh, they got to turn down the grid. No, they were just testing it.
Well, listen, they did do a test on that grid. If you remember, in California, there was these snipers. It was a small test, but that was,
Here's one of the things, though, Michael, that came out from, or the whole reason for this testing is that they estimated that if the electric grid did go down, that 90% of the population of the United States would be dead in 2 years. Now, that's just shutting off the electric.
Yeah, we'd see a lot more in the sky, too, wouldn't we?
There's no telling. So, that's just one thing. We've got ourselves so dependent on technology, and everybody's living in the cities or urban areas. We've got urban sprawl all over the place. Shut off the electricity, and guess what? Kraft isn't going to make your macaroni and cheese anymore.
Very true. Very true. So now Mars. Are there bases there now? I've seen very credible evidence that there's pyramids and faces and different things like that. And I know that they're planning this trip in 2025. They want to bring, I don't know how many people, but a whole bunch of people to Mars for a one-way trip. And I'm thinking, what do they got sitting there waiting for these people?
Right. Well, I think there's definitely, bases there. There's a lot going on there. Whistleblowers like Michael Rife, who worked on Mars and actually was aged regressed back to the time, around the time he actually left, was able to recall all these memories with his partner with a biofeedback system. Basically, talks in detail about it. I have, not been to Mars. I was only recruited. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but yeah, we can pretty much safely bet that there's a lot going on there. Actually, Captain K said that, those that went up there to help establish this stuff, connected to the military. There are indigenous, forms there, or life forms, that, didn't really want us to be there, but we, as long as we kept to ourselves, it was fine. But then I guess that didn't happen, and a number of people got killed. There's all sorts of stuff going on there. I mean, it's kind of like, you got to really dig in and do the research. Because I haven't been there myself, I can only, talk about what I've read. But I listened to a lot of, conversations, and just sort of had my ear out. And, at the time that I was being recruited, the plans were to terraform it. And, they were talking about the colonies there. And I was just, trying to be like as close to the conversations as possible. And, they wanted to keep me from knowing a certain amount of stuff, of course. But yeah, I mean, we have been on Mars before. And of course, in our ancient history, when we look at the planets Maldek, and that's now a part of the asteroid belt as an exploded planet. Back then Mars had life on it, Venus had life on it, Maldek was a planet. Now it's like we have an asteroid belt with exploded planets. We're in a lower density, and there's ruins on Mars, and now we're trying to get back to Mars. But at the same time, it's like, we got to look at ourselves here, and ask ourselves, are we in our sovereignty? Are we free beings? Who's pulling the strings, and who's trying to run the show here? Because our ascension time is a given, and it's a part of like what the Mayans understood, and it's been a part of an understanding when the planetary body was created, that this was pretty much the divine plan, or how we would unfold and reactivate our DNA. Because in the original Atlantis and Lemuria, when we had 12-strand DNA or more, we still fell. So there was a new plan set in motion. And that's been hijacked, because we were very vulnerable coming in, not having all our DNA, completely activated. And so because we were vulnerable and the Anunnaki came in, they decided to, stunt us and create a slave race. Now, and so now it's like about going back to Mars, so that they could kind of run the show from that base and thin out the population.
Off planet. It's interesting. I get a charge out of how you explain this, because I look back at the biblical record. And when you look at the biblical record, there's actually a prime directive given toward Earth, which has never been accomplished. And it's right there in Genesis, the 1st chapter, where it says God created man in his image, and he created the male and female, and then told them to be fruitful, become many, and fill the earth. Now, when this original seeding took place, we had 12-strand DNA. We were perfect, and chances are, based on the record, we didn't have the beta operating speed of the brain. In other words, our brain only cycled up to about 16 to maybe 18 cycles per second at the most. It never got into the beta fight or flight response, which is the where your brain has to cycle at least from 16 up to 22, 24, 26, depending on the stress, probably as high as 28 cycles per second. And that, the worst thing you can give a life form that has free will is the beta operating speed of the brain, where you can fight or flight. And that causes a whole bunch of situations. And when you go back to the account in Genesis, it says that there was a serpent, a reptilian. Interestingly enough, you later find out in the book of Ezekiel that he is the covering cherub of Eden, a off-planet being with high power.
It's kind of the...
And there we were hijacked. My personal belief is, if the fruit on the tree of knowledge actually did exist, most likely it contained a virus which erased part of our DNA.
Well, it's that that whole "let us make man in our image" that kind of makes me wonder.
Well, you see, Michael, here's the thing. It's the soul image. If you look at the actual account on Adam's creation, it says that he was fashioned after the dust. He was taken from the dust of the ground. And aren't we star children? Every scientist worth his salt, at least in the astronomy section, will tell you we are made up of the elements of the stars.
And that's something else I actually want to bring up, is because I know the listeners are going to ask this in the chat tonight, and that is about the star children, indigo children, I think they call them.
You know, my personal belief is that we've been here for centuries. It's just that we were misunderstood most of our lives. Now people are saying, oh, wow, my child's brilliant. He's got these connections. How does this happen? Because we are aware of what's going on around us, my own opinion.
Right.
So the whole story, though, the correlation I want to make is that when you look at the account in Genesis, we were kidnapped. We were kidnapped by a superior race, and then you go a little further in the account. We have the first account of an invasion, an alien invasion, which is better recorded in the Book of Enoch. But interestingly enough, this alien invasion where the Watchers come correlates with the same time frame of the Mayans, 5,125 years ago, the beginning of the last long Baktun. So here we are trying to make a reconnection again, Michael.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy.
You was cut out once too, Peter, when you earlier. Yeah, you came back, but here we are.
Anyway, yeah, so here we are back together again, folks. But the account in the scriptures is matching exactly what you're saying, where we were hijacked or kidnapped early on, and then when we look at the account of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, we've got an alien invasion, which happens when? One long Baktun ago, 5,125 years approximately. So we've got these synchronicities in history which are all coming about now, and we're standing definitely at a threshold. Now,
yeah.
So here we are. What threshold do you feel we're standing at, Laura?
Well, I mean, it's just interesting to look at all this because, you know, the time we were hijacked was around the time that we sank into the lower density, and sort of this whole density kind of got captured and enclosed in this, artificial matrix, with these technologies put underground in order to affect the ley lines so that, around this time we would be pretty crippled on a spiritual level. The whole thing was to prevent us from, achieving our DNA upgrade, which was going to be a natural process based on sharing codes from all these different root races that were coming in. And this was a different sort of experiment compared to the one before when we were 12 strand and beyond. So, in that vulnerability, of course, the galactic wars just ended up sinking into this lower density, but it's the same wars that have been going on for a long time, which one could consider the Lucifer rebellion, the first war in heaven that has just kind of stepped down into, density to the lower density until it's now become about our consciousness and the war, and tug of war with our consciousness. And so we're on the threshold of getting further immersed into these, technological controls where we lose all morality and we're not, working on our spiritual development, or we're on the threshold of recognizing that the most important thing we can focus on is our spiritual development and our soul growth, recognizing who we are and recognizing also that consciousness can activate and upgrade, DNA, despite all the different afflictions and digressions that we've experienced. Waking up isn't just like understanding, the conspiracy stuff. It's also understanding, what it means to, be in balance and to have integrity, because that clears the chakras. And through clearing the chakras, we're able to activate our galactic chakras. And it's interesting because Chiron, the wounded healer, which is an asteroid, connected to the whole asteroid belt, being called the wounded healer, gives us what we need through the pain body so that we can start to wake up. But the thing is, if we see that pain as from the perspective of victim consciousness, we end up enslaving ourselves and we end up giving our power away to all these different things out there that are trapping us in that vulnerability, saying, hey, we've got the solution, where everything's externalized. But if we can take that pain and say, wait a second, it's connecting me to my ancient memories, it's connecting me to who we used to be, and what we're capable of, then we start to open that bridge, and that's why it's called the Rainbow Bridge. And then we start to really restore ourselves. And so it's our wounds and our pain and our anguish that helps us to open these portals, but it's also the very thing that makes us give our power away and keeps us trapped. So we have a choice about how we're going to handle the different stuff going on. Are we going to go into addiction? Are we going to get immersed in the matrix and lose our morality? or are we going to let it help us to grow and be a catalyst for our expansion? And this is the threshold. It's like, and this is what I do in work on. I do session work, and I just help people relate to pain, misery, and suffering in a new way so that it can actually serve them and not crush them.
You know, you bring up an interesting point, and when we can get tied into this, and that is using, I try to break everything down scientifically, but when we are tied into what we'll call the matrix, or tied into the technology, oh, we got a better way of doing things, and we are experiencing life at the beta level, and that's the physical level. And we need to get out of that level. When you start to get out of that level, you leave the beta, you go into alpha. So where your brain starts to relax and slow down. So where we pray, we meditate, we daydream, we start to plan our futures. We see our futures, we create our futures starting in alpha. We see our futures in theta, and we can live our futures in delta. So as you are pulling yourself out of the conscious world that we're stuck in, this slave world, and go into those deeper levels of the mind where we can actually slow our brains, actually slowing the physical brain down, getting rid of all the clutter. And you have to go into a state of prayer or meditation or some sort of a daydream state anyway. Or guess what? When we make love, we are in the alpha state. You can't make love in beta. Trust me, it doesn't work. But it does work in alpha very nicely. And so it's getting into that spiritual connection. I like to say we're 1 part physical, 3 parts spiritual. And it's getting into the vibration of love where that starts to affect our lives. And as you said, yes, even affect our DNA. What we think affects our DNA.
The love frequency. I love what you said, Laura, and how you explained that, because you know, I've been opening up to that myself as of late, understanding more about consciousness, and that we run on frequencies, and that we can't, you know, the fear is their frequency. That's what they use to enslave us and hold us down. And I just love how you put that in place. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and the thing is, you know, a lot of people don't recognize they're being controlled. They're sort of in that unconscious sort of stupor of shopping and media and just whatever, you know, they're being fed in the news. And then there's those that are really having a tough time and are trying to, you know, make sense out of it all. And there's all these different stages to kind of breaking out of it. And one could call it the dark night of the soul, or going into the labyrinth, or into the underworld journey. But it's that initiation that is so necessary. But it's been, you know, thrown out of our awareness, and it's been sort of projected upon as being a mental illness or a problem. And there's no time, you know, really to take, you know, for those deep inner journeys, because, you know, we're expected to go to work every day. We're expected to just be busy and kind of ignore all this stuff. And that's why alcohol's legal and marijuana is like a tough one to get legal. And it's like, because as long as we're, you know, distracted and we're, you know, doing things that keep us from the goal, you know, the better off we are. And that's why our kids get medicated. And that's why, you know, we don't have shamans and priestesses in our societies that we can recognize on a level of how it used to be. It's more ingrained in the religions and the patriarch and just control and domination and guilt and, you know, all these different things, instead of the inner journey in order to, you know, activate that divine blueprint and live in accordance with that and natural law and cosmic law. Instead, it's all like, you know, fed to us from a book. It's all kind of, you know, overlaid on us. And it's like we either get it or we don't, or we're sinners or we're not. And it's like we've lost that natural connection and that grounding with Mother Earth. And that's where we're going to get exactly what we need, because we get everything we need to help us to grow. But, you know, we have nothing but, you know, traps out there. And I call it like these synthetic spider webs. Like, it's just like, you know, right as we're about to emerge or take the next initiation, it's like something yanks us and says, you know, look this way or go over there. And it's because there's frequency fences in our DNA. And to move through the frequency fences, you have to be willing to kind of go through a death rebirth process and move through that thickness and into those programmings to see them for what they really are. But of course, you get psychically attacked when that happens, because they don't want you to leave, you know, the cage that they've created. And so anybody who's, on a spiritual path, might say like, wow, this is pretty brutal. It's not just like sitting there and meditating. It's like, there's a lot of different initiations one has to go through. But if we can reintroduce that concept to people and to our children, we can help initiate them into these expanded states of consciousness without it being like, wow, because you're crying or you're having a tough time and you don't want to listen to class, you need to go on medication. In actual fact, it's a good thing when our kids don't want to listen and, have deeper questions and have, emotions. So, but it's set up as being a problem, and all the things that keep us addicted are glamorized. So,
something that just boggles my mind, Laura, is around 2000, I had met a woman that was very deeply involved in autism and autism awareness, and unfortunately she had 2 autistic children herself. And she was, educating me to autism, something I had not a lot of knowledge of prior. And she said at that time there was that one child in 1,000 were getting autism. Just 2 days ago, I heard the number was 1 in 68.
wow.
How do you go in 14 years? How do you go from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 68? Something is definitely wrong going with the way that our children are being treated or being dealt with right from birth.
Well, I think that the elite, call them what you will, but I think that when these kids that they claim are ADHD and these other things and they want to drug them down is, I think what they recognize that that's something special. There's a child who's got a better awareness.
Michael, I totally agree.
Yeah.
The one child, the first child I had that was classified as ADD and HDAD, because he couldn't pay attention in class. He'd come home from school and start little projects down in the basement that he'd work on for hours.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're telling me this kid doesn't have any attention span?
Well,
maybe you're boring the crap out of him.
They want us to believe we're no better than cattle. We're just a number, and that we're all the same. We all get taught the same. We all learn the same, and that's just not so. And that's why they want to dumb us down. They want to get these kids, get them on these pharmaceuticals, change their frequencies. They'll never be conscious if they're not aware of their consciousness, and if they're not, well, they're never going to know the truth, and we'll enslave them forever. And that's the process.
Interestingly enough, that this kid who was classified with ADD and ADHD turned around and built his own house at the age of 22. Had his own house built, a custom home built at the age of 22.
Yeah, these are special children.
So it's like, come on. A good spanking works well, but I'm not being abusive here. I'm just saying a good spanking works well. With this one particular child that I was mentioning, nothing worked. Stick him in the corner, that didn't work. Nothing worked with him. If he was determined to do something, he was going to do it. I just had to stay one step ahead of him his whole life. And when I didn't stay one step ahead, I had to deal with it.
If they had the ADHD and all these drugs back when I was growing up, they probably would have put me on them, because I was one of those kids who I didn't learn like the other kids. If I was interested, I'd be a master at it. If I didn't want nothing to do with it, had no interest, it was just boring to me.
That's how I was. I didn't pay attention at all. I doodled. I had my head out the window, and I was like journeying and traveling in my mind. My imagination was, but yeah. And then when I was interested in something, I could pull an A, and there was a question of whether or not I had learning disabilities, and and when they mentioned ADHD or ADD, I just told them I had better things to think about, and that's why I couldn't really pay attention. And once I left, I really proved to myself that my brain does work. It just did not resonate at all with the system, and it never had. I had the worst attendance. I was just not there. And it's too bad that people are just put in that box immediately, and so many gifts and abilities are internalized and actually felt from the individual like it's like a curse or a problem, because it's not fully seen, and that can create an incredible imbalance. So in actual fact, just the negation of these other abilities and gifts and the internalization of it and the projection upon it as being a problem is the
And here we go again. Oh, this is what, 6?
Yeah, I'll tell you, every time it gets interesting. Every time it gets interesting, they.
Laura,
Okay, I'm here.
that was 6. That's pretty good. Well, Laura, it's probably going to take 3 hours just to do an hour and a half interview.
I know, it's funny.
No, it's not. It really isn't, folks. And this is the 6th time that we've actually been knocked off from our interview with Laura here, and that just shows you how much they don't want you to know what's going on. Would you agree with that statement, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something going on here, but we always cover some real deep stuff, so it's like, that's the slap in the face because we yeah.
Now we're getting to a time of change. You mentioned something, and here this is kind of like where we tend to disagree a little bit on it, and here's the opposite sides of the same coin. But before I get into this, and you mentioned ascension. I talk about basically getting into a meditative state or getting in touch through meditation with our soul selves and making the connection back to Yahweh. Here's where we go with the male and female part of the universe, or the multiverses, which is really more accurate. But here's an interesting thing. When you go back to Genesis, the first prophecy which is given is this, and this is Yahweh talking to Satan, or the Satan dominion here at the time. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. You will strike him in the heel, you will bruise him in the heel, but he will bruise you in the head. Now this was a prophecy of the forthcoming Messiah, but most people think that the woman is Eve. It was never Eve. It was more closely related to Gaia, or actually the whole entire physical multiverse, which would be Yahweh's woman, which gives life to everything.
Right.
And so here we have at least 50% of that DNA, because it would be the woman's seed and the serpent seed. And so after 6,000 years of time, they have to believe that through plenty of interbreeding, crossbreeding, and the different breeding programs that the human race has been put under, by now we're pretty much 50-50. So activating your DNA becomes very important, because which way do you want to activate it? To the serpent seed or to the woman's seed?
Right, and this is the thing with the reptilian energy, and just the fact that we have a mammalian and reptilian brain, and and we're dealing with junk DNA, which also connects to this lost consciousness of the masculine and feminine. And so, but where do you see our differences? Because I know we've talked about it before.
You look at the feminine, I look at the masculine.
Oh yeah, but I mean the two, they belong together, and that's the thing.
Absolutely.
It's like,
that's why I say we look at the same coin from two different sides. We complement each other.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Yeah, no, it's interesting because we're dealing with, I mean, even the raw material mentions that imposters came in and actually used the name of Yahweh, and that and it seems that you really connect with the original voice and the true voice, and have been able to kind of bypass all the different distortions that have come in that were under, I guess you could say, the Orion group's control or manipulation when religion came about. And Yahweh really has nothing to do with what man has done with religion. In actual fact, yeah. And it's kind of like, from what I get, is just kind of watching this all and just kind of like, wow, all these names, being used and distorted with the energy beneath it, being all about our enslavement, which is absolutely has nothing to do with Yahweh. And it's so unfortunate that name was used and distorted, because then people consider that, like the demiurge. And, even the demiurge, though, is just a bridge between us and the true source. And the demiurge energy is an extension of it that reaches out to this lower density and kind of holds it in a holding tank while the mother nurtures it back home again, and allows us the free will choice to see if we're going to, choose the, I guess you could say, the serpent energy, or our divinity. But the thing is, when we put the two together, that's when we awaken the dragon Kundalini, and we come into balance with cosmic law again. And that's what duality does, is it separates the two and causes us to need to pick one side or the other, when I feel that when we merge the two, that's when we restore the tree of life, because the serpent energy gets activated, but it expands us and opens the chakras, instead of, where the duality puts us in alignment with the reptilian energy that cuts us off from source and keeps us in that low morality, the misuse of sexual energy, that aggression, and that, desire for control, and where we enable sort of that Luciferian negative ego perspective. But if we actually merge all of it and merge the polarities and create that alchemical marriage, all parts can be included without that division and duality. And so, that's what the grid lines have been affected with these technologies, is to keep duality alive, because in our imbalance is where we're most vulnerable to these parasitic influences. But in our balance of the masculine and feminine, that's when the tree of life is restored, our DNA is restored, and the dragon Kundalini energy, or the serpent energy, can flow freely through us without being limited to our lower chakras, which is what, of course, that quote that you said is more seeking to do with that warning and that prophecy.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's this general time that we're coming about. That's why I've often said all eyes of the cosmos are on planet Earth right now, because what's happening here is going to set up the paradigm for the next, well, indefinitely. It's where we go from here. This is the turning point, as far as I can see it. This is the turning point of humanity, where if we stay in that lower base, and it's very simple. If you can get out of the beta operating system of the mind, where that fight and flight response is, just remove that from all of mankind, or the whole human race, and wars would stop instantly, because there would be no more fighting. You wouldn't have that response. You could still have free will, but everything would be done in a state of love. And the interesting thing is, when you read the account of when they actually ate this fruit, prior they were, I'm talking about the story of Adam and Eve, the first seeded couple, they were naked. They didn't care. Hey, when you're with your significant other, you usually wind up in the bedroom and take your clothes off, and you're naked, and you enjoy it. But after they ate the fruit, they felt the need, they were embarrassed, they felt the need to cover themselves. And then when they heard the voice of God, they went and hid themselves. They took flight. They were in beta. Something happened which took them out of the alpha and now put them in the beta operating system, where fight and flight reside. So but you can't make love in beta. You can rape somebody in beta, but you cannot make love in beta. It's impossible.
Yeah. And this is, where we are today, is like, we've got all the choices in front of us. And even though we see in our physical world the obvious symptoms of, this negative agenda, really taking hold of many beings, as long as you, unplug from the programming and you don't eat the bait, you're still able to expand. And in that expansion, you're able to reach energies that have, the physics are different in these higher dimensions. They can actually transmute everything. And this is where the alchemy comes in. And so the inversion of the pentagram and all the rituals that want to keep us sort of at the mercy of everything in our environment, keep us in, money survival, emotional stress and disempowerment, all lower chakra energies, is being turned around, when we connect with spirit, because that's how we create the alchemy. And so as long as we keep our focus on our expansion and our spiritual development, we can, easily transmute all of this. And this is, what's happening with the Venus transits, because the planet Venus is drawing a perfect pentagram in the sky, and it has been for the last 26,000 years. And this is the window period where we're able to recognize that the flow is with us, and all we need to do is kind of let go and get out of the way of ourselves and drop all the different things that has taught us to focus on our own egos instead, and to be more ego based. When we can align ego with our higher self, that's when the alchemy happens. And we're in alignment with the galactic plane right now. And so not only, does that make it easier, that's also why they're really making it harder as best as they can. But the thing is, once we recognize it, it's much easier to deal with. And also, since 2009, the 13th sign of the zodiac has come on board. and is now like a functioning part of the zodiac. So when we think of 13 and the fact that there's no elevator 13, and that's been such a number of superstition, the number 13 is actually what connects to the mother energy and the divine feminine, which has been exiled. So in returning to that consciousness and union with the Father, that marriage births the Christ consciousness and the miracle vibration to pretty much transmute everything that we're up against. And it's simple, but we're not taught it. And the morality in this culture is just completely at the lowest. It's just so sad.
It absolutely is. If you don't believe that, just turn on the news. Even if it's fake news, what are they showing you? The latest thing is, two 12-year-old girls almost murdered one of their classmates because they were carrying out some fantasy that was part of a game that they were playing online.
Yeah. I'm telling you, society, and you got to ask yourself this. You go back, I don't know, when I was growing up, back in the early 80s, the late 70s, you didn't hear about all this crap. And now, today you see people are going nuts. You got people who are attacking others on the street, taking bites out of them. You got these kids playing knockout. You've got like these girls who decide they're going to take a friend into the woods and stab them 19 times. And I mean, society has really gone off the handle, and you got to wonder, is it all this Wi-Fi? How are they doing it? I mean, they're obviously, something's changed, between our food, water, medicine, and now all these microwaves and different things that are floating through the air. Wow.
Yeah, and it takes a lot to bust through it. I mean, just going out of town and going into nature for a couple of days and then coming back to my house, I can feel the difference. Just, I'm in a neighborhood. I'm kind of stuck right now. I got to kind of get out of here. I'm used to living, in open spaces and in more, just lots of wilderness. And, there's smart meters, there's cell towers everywhere. And I can absolutely feel the difference in just the tension that comes up, in our household that we, consciously work with. And we have essential oils and we have all sorts of things to counteract it and sound healing stuff. But, it's thick and it's a heavier density and then we see weather modification and, nature being attempted to be controlled. So anybody who thinks that, the feminine isn't being controlled just simply needs to pay attention to the fact that our skies are being sprayed. And, when we talk about the divine feminine, it's not just a feminine figure or just women. It's within men. It's our own internal balance of these energies that we all hold. And it's the cosmic mother. It's the planetary body. And a portion of the goddess, the consort of Yahweh is made up of this planetary body in order to help us to return home again. Because of course, the creator is infused in creation and is seated in every cell and in every, energy, but is buried alive in a lot of people.
I would totally agree. And folks, I'm going to tell you straight up. The Bible is one of the most misrepresented. No, I take that back. It is the most misrepresented book on the planet because religion got involved. Get rid of the religion, put in exopolitics, and read the Bible from an exopolitical viewpoint, and the answers start to show themselves very clearly. Very clearly. The whole purpose of the Bible, it should have been named 6,000 Years of Alien Involvement in Human History. Because that's pretty much what it is. And we're living at the time period now where this is all culminating. And that Christ consciousness that you mentioned, it is actually a legal claim here involved. Because when we go back to the actual man, and a lot of people say, oh, well, he never died, he was never put on a cross, he was never impaled, he never, whatever. If he didn't die, we're screwed. Because now, let's go back and look at the actual account. An extraterrestrial shows up to a young Jewish woman and says, guess what? You've been impregnated. And you've been impregnated with the Son of God that has perfect DNA. This is the whole redemption of the earth, if you want to call it that, but it's actually more. Yeah. How many women today turn around and say, oh, I was abducted and inseminated or impregnated by aliens? We had one on our show a few months back. And she was proud of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the scary thing. People that are going around saying, oh, they're all our friends. And it's like, yes, there's a lot of benevolent, races out there. We're in a multidimensional cosmos. But the ones that are really relating, to this earth density, I mean, it's almost like, flies on, what, in our governments, working with them to control the whole of humankind. But, we can be butterflies. There's other things in the ecosystem where we don't have to function in this lower dense
city.
And that makes 7.
Hi there.
That makes 7.
So I don't know where I got cut off, but anyway.
We were talking about the densities. Yeah, well, I told Michael it's going to take 3 hours to do an hour and a half interview.
I know.
We only have another 20 minutes with you. Oh, geez. Let me start off. Michael went to get a cup of coffee here. He didn't know when we were going to get you back. He said, "This is no party for me. I got to go back and edit all this." I said, "Michael, think about it. If we did this,
oh my God,
if we could never do this live, and it's a great interview." And he agreed.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're back. Let me just pick this back up by saying, I'll go back and reiterate. The Bible is one of the most misunderstood books. It has all the answers there once we look at it exopolitically and not from a religious standpoint. Remember, religion came from the Anunnaki. It's a control mechanism. Jesus never said that he came to earth to establish a new religion. He said he came to establish his kingdom, getting followers for his kingdom. It was a political situation that was going on. And the blood sacrifice not only pays off any debt that may have been created all the way back when, prior to the rebellion, but it also lays a blood claim to the planet. Now, you go into Revelation where we're seeing the prophecies really being majorly fulfilled, even the chemtrails, which we talked about, Revelation chapter 8, I believe it's verse 12, that says a third of the moon, a third of the sun, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars would be darkened. Then chemtrails darkened 28% of the sky. Close enough to a third.
Right.
But it goes on, and it says that in Revelation 19, it says that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, you see now the kingdom has been established, is returning with the armies of the heavens. Or armies, I like that. It's plural, so you have all races involved, and they're all from across. They're gathered across the universe or multiverse. And why? They're coming to put down the rebellion and start us on the next chapter of our lives. And this is where we get our DNA repaired. Now, you talk about it more as ascension. I look at it more as a process of our liberation from this system of evil which we're forced to live under. And it's going to be an extraterrestrial liberation, or actually an interdimensional liberation by the most powerful entities in the multiverse.
Yeah, when I say ascension, it's a grounded version. It's not some sort of rapture or floating away, or I don't even like to use that word anymore. To me, it's the blossoming of human consciousness. We start off as a seed, and here we, are unfolding, and have had the opportunity through the tree of good and evil, and the tree of knowledge to learn the lessons of duality while we've been under, a lot of attack and, extremely vulnerable in the process of awakening because of all the mind control and all the different agendas out there. But this is our chance to liberate based on, wearing different hats, maybe in different lifetimes, and seeing kind of a full range of experiences to then make the free will choice. Okay, I get it. I see what's happening. This is the time to get on board with what's real. And it's a natural process. It's not some ascension that's beyond us. It's something, it's like returning to who we truly are. It's a liberation. And it's an expansion into our multidimensional nature and our multidimensional divine birthright, because that's who we are. We're multidimensional beings, just like the planetary body is. Everything's been in lockdown and stuck in this third density, just like our DNA. And the stargates on the earth, our DNA, and our chakras and everything are all interconnected. So as we expand and open up, we assist the planetary body, and as she expands and opens up, we, get that transmission. And it's, connecting source to the earth body, to the underworld womb, which is the womb of the great mother, which has become hell because all these controllers are in there, tinkering around with these technologies. But yeah, I don't really consider it like an ascension as much as I consider it just a natural unfoldment and a liberation, just like you're saying, because, these aliens, this is not where it's at. I mean, it's important for us to understand that we're made of everything, and we're like dealing with an organism that is very similar to the human body, and the same laws apply. And so when we can see, what it takes for us to have a healthy immune system and to be in balance and to be, achieving well-being and bliss in our own lives, the planetary body's going through the same thing, but it requires all of us to be on board. It's like we can deal with disease where our organs are not quite getting along and there's illness, but when we reach our higher consciousness and we come into balance, it sets everything in order and everything in the body starts to work together. But it doesn't work well if the immune system's not functioning and the consciousness is lacking. It starts to feed the cells of the body and the organs, information that throws it out of whack. And that's what we're dealing with these galactic wars, is that all these organs are fighting each other, but in actual fact, they're supposed to be working together. But the higher consciousness has to be the directive. It has to be what's in dominion for everything to come into balance. And instead, it's been these lower forces that have kept everything in division so that the disease prevails, and these kind of overlords are running the show because of it. But they're like the lower creator gods. They're not the ultimate, but they're that next layer down, the fallen watchers, the ones that can easily mimic the originator energies and easily imitate through distorting truth just enough to get our attention, but just enough to screw us over.
And that's why they're called rebels. And that's why it's a satanic rebellion. And I look at this from a very interesting viewpoint, because when I read the account, I see where we have the divinity, and what's been explained to me is that after we have our DNA repaired, and I like the fact that, let me just digress. You mentioned something very important. If you think that you're going to be raptured or you're going to ascend to another realm, hey, have a good trip. I promise you we will not see you after the paradigm change. However, if you want to raise your consciousness, stick around for a while, and you got to do so in love.
Well,
because we're going to see the end of the human family and the end of the human race and the birth of the human family in this. But once our DNA is repaired and we are brought back to a perfect state, that's when we no longer are on a prison planet and we take our next step. The next step is to start to populate every Earth-like planet within the universe.
If you do get raptured, then you better prepare for the probe.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. There's so much New Age deception. There's so many traps out there. It's unbelievable, and it's just so awesome because you have an understanding of like the deeper messages, and it's like you cut right to the core, and you use these texts that other people kind of misinterpret, and you're able to unearth the real stuff in it.
I have good teachers.
That's awesome. And the thing is, it's like I'm not against going off planet, and the whole concept of going to Mars, sounded, like, wow, yeah, we are going to, be opening up to our galactic family and doing all this. But I focus more on, well, I don't want to do it under a control agenda. I want to, I want to share with the human race, what the truth is, because we're the Merkaba, we're the UFO, we're developing our human vessel to be capable of handling the high vibration of our higher self and spirit, which is the way it should be, which is what activates our DNA and helps us to achieve this placement in our universal family in the galactic cosmos, and it has to be done through that. And no matter what planet you put us on, before that time comes, it still might be under the control of some other thing. And we got to drop the agendas and just focus on our own internal liberation and freedom. And that's why the inner work is everything, because we are the most advanced technology. We don't need all this other stuff. I mean, maybe to get us out of some of the troubles we're in, but it has to be in harmony with nature. It has to be in harmony with our own genetics so that we can advance as it's helping things heal, rather than being put on an artificial life support system, which to me is what transhumanism is. It's an artificial life support system where everybody's zombies and they're just like plugged into a computer, when we can just use technology, that are based more on frequency, sound, and color to, restore things, sound healing, as we're also advancing ourselves in our DNA, and then we're able to expand and visit other planets. But I felt it was too premature to go to Mars with these people, and it was too cloak and dagger and like too hidden and secretive and too much mind control and weirdness, that I was like, this isn't the time. This isn't the one that is what that is all about. That's coming later, when we start to recognize that it's us that are going to get us there, and we have that capability, and it's in our DNA. We just have to remember it.
Absolutely. And once that DNA is restored, there's a reason, there's several reasons why the account of the Gospels are put in there. When you look at, or when we look at all of the, quote, miracles that Jesus was able to do. Now, wait a minute, let's look at the man. He had perfect DNA, and he had the spirit of Yahweh. Actually, the more correct pronunciation for the creator of all things is Yahuwah. So I was told by a Jewish, a Hebrew woman who was Christian, who was an expert in ancient Hebrew linguistics. So I'll take her word for it. Yeah, interesting credentials she had, but she said it's Yahuwah. So we'll go with that. But here's the thing. I love that you said that we're vessels. Our bodies are three-dimensional vessels for the soul energy, which is what connects all of us together and connects all of us back to the source of the soul of the whole multiverse, which indeed is Yahuwah. And so once these connections are all reestablished and we have that perfect DNA, hey, you want some wine? I got some water here. We can make that adjustment for you. You will have that power. And when we leave Earth, it won't be to go inhabit some place like Mars. It will be to go inhabit some place like Earth in a perfect condition. Something that is untouched and virgin. Something that we can actually populate. And that's the great thing. You look at our bodies. I don't care how old you are, your body is not older than 10 years. Every 7 years, your body recreates itself, replaces every cell, and every 10 years, your brain replaces every cell. So we are a totally new person every 10 years. The only thing which ages is our soul consciousness. So if we had perfect DNA, we would get to a mature human state. We would never age past that. And now here's the great part. Every healthy woman is born with 400,000 eggs in her ovaries, and men never stop making sperm. The perfect reproduction system to, guess what? Populate a planet. Laura, you want to have your own planet with your all the kids on that planet are yours, or your grandchildren, or great-grandchildren. Whatever. And they're all perfect. Nobody's being a rotten little rat, you know? Come here, you brat. You need a spanking.
Yeah.
No, they're all working within the divine person who we actually are. And that the prime directive toward Earth, fill Earth, become many, subdue it, have in subjection the fish, the animals, turn it into a paradise. That prime directive is going to be issued to the whole third dimension for the human race. We have a great future ahead.
We really do, and nothing can get in the way. I mean, the physical matter that we're surrounded by doesn't have more power over spirit. And so we just have to connect with, what has true dominion, and it starts to, it's a miracle vibration, so it starts to shift things, it starts to adjust things, but it's a part of nature, it's part of the regenerative power of nature. And we tend to think of all these, it's everything. And
we lost you there for a minute.
Oh, that's fine. We're used to it now.
Yeah, that was number 8. So we're keeping score here. This sets a new record for World Watches, without a doubt.
Oh, it sure does. It sure does.
And you have to edit all this. I feel for you.
Well, we can never do this live, obviously.
Yeah.
Anyway, Laura, I know you have to go soon. Closing comments, dear, if you would.
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I know this was a little choppy for the listeners, but just know I do session work. I work with astrology as a tool to help to liberate us from the wheel, to help us to integrate all our many aspects, to become whole again, to find our internal balance of the masculine and feminine, so that we can connect with our Christ consciousness and connect with the goddess and have both feet on the ground as we expand into all that we are. Check out my website, cosmicgaiasophia.com. And, just enjoy the inner work and let, the things that hurt serve you, because they're here to help us to awaken to who we truly are. It helps us to recall our memories of what we're made of, and don't let it sink you. Let it serve you. I guess is my message.
People who seem to be the most awake, and it's really a spiritual awakening, are typically people who have gone through some sort of a tragic situation, and they come out the other side, whether it's like, they were saved by their guardian angel, or whether they had a near-death experience, whatever the case might be. It's usually some sort of what first initially appears to be a very negative situation. And if we use it correctly and examine it, we can grow by it. And Laura, yes, we can become awakened very easily by the negative if we examine it and don't let it tie us down.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
All right. Well, Laura, thank you very much. It's been nice talking to you again. I know I had you on Late Night in the Midlands, I think back in, I think it was 2009 for me. So it's great to talk to you again. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And we'll be in touch for sure, Peter. And
absolutely. We need to do another show. We should probably do a video together and get it out on YouTube. Kind of script it just a little bit, so, and 30 minutes, no more. Shoot it out there and let the world be amazed.
I would love that. That would be great.
Super. What? I'll tell you what. We'll plan on doing that in the future, and in the near future, and we'll sit down and record something. Hopefully, the NSA won't be giving us a hard time like they did today.
Right.
Yep.
Take care. Thank you very much, Laura. Love and blessings.
You too. Okay, love and blessings. Bye.
Bye.
Relation with some beings that he was in communication with about this, off-planet venture. And so I paid attention to the names that he was talking to and just everything that I could possibly kind of retain as far as what I was seeing. And I did a lot of research into some of these names and started to really get the intuitive hits of what it was really all about, and even some prophetic dreams. And I mean, from the get-go, I knew that this was something I didn't want to do. But as I got further immersed in it and realized that wasn't something I could easily get out of, once I was kind of immersed in the relationship and living with this person, and it sort of reached to the extreme, and it was a lot different than what I thought, being so hidden and being, really about not being able to say anything to anybody, and it relating to, potential disasters. Along the way, when I recognized that the names were associated with things like, chemtrails and HARP and psychotronic weaponry, and I had felt targeted my whole life, I knew that, this was something completely different. And that's when I really started to research people like Dan Burrish, timelines, hidden agendas, artificial timelines, artificial telepathy, and everything that I could possibly get my hands on to try and understand what was going on. And when I got a grip and understood enough of it, I really worked to just get out of it, completely and totally. Before, it didn't have that extremity to it. It was just sort of like, this is the goal. But the more I tried to get out of it, the stronger the forces were that didn't want me to go. And that's when I found out that he was sent to, take me, and kind of didn't really resonate with anything in school. So I just studied my own stuff. And I'm an intuitive astrologer, an esoteric astrologer, I guess you could say, working with archetypes and the deeper soul aspects, the deeper soul journey. And I use it as a healing tool. And my background's also in metaphysics, exopolitics, and I consider myself a cosmic mythologist and a global alchemist because of the deeper, work, and just kind of like how I work to connect the dots and, use my own personal path as a way to just find these answers, and it's sort of like just sort of happened that way. And I realized, okay, I'm on quite a path that's revealing a lot. And then I was recruited in 2006 to go off planet to Mars, which really gave me an insight into what's happening behind the scenes even more so, and helped me to understand the deeper layers of the military-industrial complex and a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with our governments and extraterrestrials. And then, of course, the more off-planet benevolent.
Oops. Shiznit, how the hell do I...
Hello?
Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh boy, you brought up the industrial. That's just exactly where I wanted to go too, and I guess.
Click.
Let's just. We can edit this out, so it's no big deal. Why don't we pick it up from the industrial, from the? Let's pick it up from the military-industrial complex. How's that?
Sure.
Okay.
Right. So, a lot about my, I guess, explorations into the hidden mysteries and, the hidden information happened in 2006 when I was recruited to go off planet. And it really helped me to understand the deeper layers of the military industrial complex and, really what we're up against as far as, hidden agendas and extraterrestrial forces connecting with our government. I guess you could call them the lower type. I don't even really consider them extraterrestrial, but um,
Let me ask you a question here. You said that you were recruited to go off planet. Can you go explain that a little bit?
well, in 2006, I was approached by somebody, and and I met this person. We, really clicked right off the bat, and the conversation got really weird pretty fast about, just the end times and what we're dealing with in 2012, um, and over time, as I was, seeing this person on occasion and, beginning to, form a relationship, um, I was presented with the opportunity to go off planet, but it was very secretive. And I thought that it was just sort of, this was something the person was going to do anyway. And I just happened to be, in the synchronicity to meet this person, but it was something I could easily get out of. But 6 months into the relationship, I found out that he was specifically sent to find me, to recruit me. And, that whole experience along the way was really intense because, he was going to secret meetings and I was observing all of this and I noticed a lot going on in connection to, his, I have a lot of email exchanges and a lot that I still have stored and saved. But over the years, especially after Project Camelot came about, which was the same year I got out of the recruitment, was when Project Camelot started. I'm seeing all these other whistleblowers and I'm starting to see how this is a part of like a much larger plan. And of course, it goes back thousands of years. I mean, these agendas, but it relates to things from Project Pegasus, Andrew Bashago, whistleblowers like Michael Rife. And now we've got Captain K, talking about stuff on Mars. And, the list is pretty big.
Now, was
Yeah.
this recruitment part of the military-industrial complex, or was this more separated from that, more along extraterrestrials, let's say, wanting to preserve humans?
Well, it seems all connected, the military-industrial complex to, ETs. And it's difficult to say, especially thinking in duality of who's good and who's not good. Instead, it's like, okay, there's many different races and a lot of them are, trying to survive. But unfortunately, we're sort of caught in the middle. And so these particular beings seem to be future human selves that have time traveled back and had the appearance of like, a gray ET. Dan Burrish and other whistleblowers talk about the future human selves. Many remote viewers, notice that they came from different timelines in the future. And it does relate to the military industrial complex. In actual fact, in the Eisenhower administration, there was something, people have heard of MJ-12, which was set up in Truman's administration. But by the time Eisenhower came into office, MJ-12,
can be restored. So with that, let's welcome Laura Magdalene Eisenhower back to the show. It's been quite a while, Laura. Welcome. We'll go from there. And welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Laura, thank you for being with us. Laura, just for the people who don't are not familiar with you yet, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and your family history, I think that might enlighten some folks.
Well, my background, I did grow up in the Eisenhower family. Eisenhower's my great-grandfather, so I had an interesting upbringing, and just was definitely my own person. I have a background in wilderness education, expedition leadership, but for the most part, I was aware of my mission at a very young age and just really launched on some deep inner journeys and some very multidimensional experiences that opened me up to a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and have sort of been working to integrate the political stuff that we see with the more mythological, the deeper soul journey, and where I guess you could say the artificial matrix has sort of wedged itself between everything, keeping us in, separation. My background is kind of extensive as far as my travels and education. I'm definitely my own, I guess you could say, university unto myself. I just